Please help me welcome our speakers. We have Ryan Austin, the founder and CEO of Cognota. We have Gary Deppy, who's the Director of Learning and Organizational Effectiveness at Land O'Lakes, and ELB Learning's very own Michelle Pletch, VP of Strategic Development. So take it away, you guys.
Thank you, and so nice to be here. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of your very busy day. Oops, here we go. Out of your very busy day to spend your morning or your afternoon with us. Excited to be here as well with Gary, my colleagues Gary and Michelle. Thank you for your time as well in participating in this. We have a really action-packed webinar today, really focused on strategic alignment through the right business partnerships, whether it's internal or external, to really drive the L&D impact that we all are really looking for today in our own businesses, but also what seems to be required from us in this world of doing more with less that we continuously see. So we're going to talk about some topics today, like building strategic governance and what does that mean, looking at how do we make resources where they sometimes feel impossible through leveraging managed service providers, and as well the business case for resourcing in those cases when you might need to extend your teams for external staffing and augmenting and whatnot, and making sure that we have enough time for questions as well today. And so really excited and happy to jump in. I think one of the biggest things that we're seeing right now is, and you probably are hearing it everywhere, about how to strategically align learning investments to business goals. And a lot of the times we hear people use the word learning initiatives. I'm very particular with the word investment because it is an investment. Usually when we're investing time or money into a program, that's an investment for the business. But yet when you look at reports coming from Gartner and others, this one particularly from the Gartner framework, only about a third of all talent and learning leaders state that their strategic planning process is actually integrated with the business goals. And so this is where we're starting to continuously see and hear from other leaders outside of learning and talent development, like the CFO office, where they have concerns as well. And the reason for that is because when you dive deep into the number of what the investment looks like from a market standpoint, about $130 billion is actually invested into L&D programs. So this is money that's invested into the creation of programs, the design of programs, the delivery of experiences, and it's a lot of money. But when you look at, is it working, or are we getting the impact that we intended to receive? Again, only about 25% of L&D and talent leaders are saying that it's measured or being judged to be spent effectively, or worse, that they don't know. And then on the flip side, when you talk to the L&D teams, 47% are saying that they don't have the financial resources to get everything done that needs to be done, or that they have headcount shortages, aka capacity issues or resource challenges. And I always ask myself, what if this number, the 25% being judged effectively, was higher? 80, 90%. What would the other two numbers look like? And my bet is that it would probably decrease a lot, because we as business leaders, talent and learning people are business leaders, right? We as the business leaders for the talent and learning function are doing a better job of reporting how well are our investments doing. And that will build trust and credibility, where we can now resource the projects properly. So you'd see those numbers go down as the 25% number goes up. And it's just about speaking the language of the business. And Gary, I'd love to hear from you about if you see these pressures coming from your own business at Land O'Lakes as well, where the business is just starting to expect talent and learning to talk more in the language of the business. You know, how much time did it take? How much money did we have to invest? What's the impact that we get? Or other metrics around impact or measurement.
Yeah, absolutely. I do get that question a lot from leaders on probably more on impact of like, how are we moving the mark on whether it be skill generation or sales numbers. I've recently picked up a sales team, and so a lot of the conversation is there on how are we impacting the overall results. Time also is one, is how much time are we spending in classroom and what is the impact on that time in classroom. So certainly lots more is being asked of learning leaders, myself specifically, and others in other organizations I work with, to show up as a business partner, show up as a understanding the language of business.
And I would love to hear from the participants that are here today too in the chat about your experience on these topics and the pressures that you might be feeling and things that you're doing to overcome them as well. And Michelle, as you work with customers, what are you hearing from the market relative to this question as well about aligning to the business goals and aligning for strategic impact?
Yeah, so thanks, Ryan. We're hearing a lot more. I think there's a nice shift in thought kind of taking place now, and I'm not sure what's driving that, but it does seem like more and more conversations are taking place around the reasons behind training, which is great. But I would say there's still a large percentage of people that are kind of building trainings for the sake of building trainings and doing learning for the sake of learning, and not really, investing the time in the strategic upfront analysis, and understanding not only the reason behind the program, but measuring, its effectiveness in the end. So I would say there's a pendulum swing that the conversations are happening more. But I think, webinars like this and getting you two together, I think is an amazing opportunity to expand that discussion, because it is so important for all those things that you showed earlier about the amount of, money businesses invest, and, organizations like ours that can, kind of help you make sure you're investing it in the right way. So it's a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you. And I think to answer the question on why we're seeing this shift, I think it has to do a lot with the markets as well as digital transformation. There's just an expectation as well with AI becoming more and more of the norm. It's still a big conversation. We're adopting it more and people are turning it on a little bit more in areas of their business. But with the realities of what that can bring, I think business models want to see more efficiency, and what more efficiency means more profitability, right? And so you get the pressures from the business on, hey, if we're going to spend time and money and humans are going to be doing this work, then we want to make sure that it's impactful as well and that we're creating value for the organization and for our people. And this might be a little bit of a different shift from a mentality perspective for a lot of people. And don't be scared by that, because the reality is when you talk to different teams, they're at different maturity levels. Some people are still a little bit reactive, but they're hearing more. We don't want to be order takers anymore. We want to become those strategic advisors. And on other sides of the maturity model at the predictive state, you might be talking to teams who have cracked the code where they have the seat at the table, because when it comes to learning and talent programs and ROI and impact, they just have more data to the answers of those things. So the CFO office is coming to them, the procurement teams, they're coming to them because they want access to that data. So that's called having a seat at the table. When those partners have to come to you, they rely on you because you have more information than them. And so we see the industry as a whole, there's some really interesting research that we worked on with a big analyst. Can't tell you too much yet, but hopefully, fingers crossed, it's coming out this month. But we're seeing as the industry as a whole, really between the managed and strategic levels of a maturity model. So we're not very mature overall globally as an L&D and talent function. So don't be too hard on yourself throughout the process of going through this. And if you need help to really understand where you are on a learning ops maturity model, just contact us and we'd be happy to help do a free assessment for your team as well. So let's do a quick poll. We want to understand, and I'll go back one slide too after I answer the question. We want to understand, where do you think your team currently sits on the LearnOps maturity model as well? And I'll go back one slide just so that you can take a look at that again. So we have reactive, managed, strategic, and predictive. Reactive, really still being that order taker mentality. It's hard for you to say no when your business partners come to you, right? We haven't really built those skills to push back because we might not know how to push back yet. Versus managed, we're starting to have a better understanding, a better vision and accountability to alignment to business strategy. So at least we're starting to know, at least in our gut, that if somebody comes and asks us to do something, it might not be the right thing to do. We're starting to say no, but we're not fully there. And we don't yet have those ROI or measurement disciplines in place to understand what's happening. What does success look like on the backside? Strategic is really when you cross that line, you're seen as a trusted advisor. You have alignment to strategy. You're making recommendations on how to increase probability of success to get to our business goals with learning and talent programs to bridge skill gaps or capability gaps for the business. We have better ROI and measurement best practices in place. Predictive is when we're really starting to use AI. We have full stack visibility into our resources. We understand our capacity. We understand exactly what yes means when we say yes. And we also have an understanding of what the success might look like if we say yes versus what it might mean to say no to the business. So where does everybody sit when we stand? And again, very, very aligned with our research, we're seeing 52% of the participants from today really saying that they sit in that managed state, defined processes, but still limited strategy alignment, which makes sense on why we're here today as well. And Gary, I always say at Cognota, we get to talk about the boring but important stuff. How important is having strategic governance for you at Land O'Lakes?
It's becoming even more important, and we'll talk a little bit about the learning function. What I stepped into at Land O'Lakes was an organization that had learning that happened in a lot of places, but didn't organize around learning. And so we've been doing a lot of work there and setting up governance to understand our technology across the organization, to understand who's doing what, where thought leadership's at. We're a cooperative, so headcount's always going to be kept pretty tight. And so how do we use resources across the organization? So governance is one way that we'll accomplish our goals and work together more collaboratively.
And if for some reason some people don't know the word governance or whatnot, another way to look at it is your operating model. What are all the things, your processes, your team, how your team's structured, how your processes work, your best practices or your how do all these things work properly? And you often hear terms like federated or decentralized or centralized, which are ways that you can structure your team and these best practices and the standards. And ultimately, the right model is what's going to help you execute the fastest and create the most value for the organization. And it could change. But again, it comes down to building a strategic plan. Understanding even the right governance model starts with strategy. What's your strategy? And to understand the strategy, you got to define your strategic goals based off of the business goals, right? So talent and learning should build an investment thesis for the year on the things, the biggest impact projects for the organization that they can have influence on. And what business goals will they influence? And without them, what's the impact, the negative consequences on those business goals if L&D and talent doesn't get behind them? For example, if the CFOs want us to work more efficiently and want us to use AI, but the company doesn't know how to use AI, how effective are we going to be at actually delivering that business goal? And we've seen this before during COVID when talent and learning leaders became the superheroes of the organization, overnight stepped up and taught people how to work remotely. And it's the same concept of that. We did that. We were forced to do that, right? We were quick thinkers. So aligning to strategic planning is the same concept of that. Where do we have an immediate impact? What can we influence? So if we invest time and money or our budget into those things, we can measure the impact we have because we planned for it up front. So that also comes with planning, identifying the objectives of the strategic goals, the success criteria that will impact, brainstorming, not with just our team, but with our business partners, the actionable steps that we need to take, the roadmap that we need to take to achieve those talent objectives that tie back to the impactful business goals that we're making our bet on, and determining the sub-functions that need to have involvement in that as well. And it's easier to talk about this versus doing it, but you know, Gary, you've done this and you built a playbook for your priorities in 2025 and 2026. And thank you very much for your willingness to share this with everybody today as well. But, you know, what are we looking at here? Walk us through the thinking of what you and your team did here.
Sure. So I'll share a couple things about it. So this is the kind of the highest cover sheet of our strategy and playbook. I'd first talk a little bit about the development process of this. So we always start with corporate strategy. Our corporate strategy culminates with a board meeting. Our HR strategy follows. And I always follow the learning strategy to map to those two processes. So I'm hearing what the business leaders at the highest level want, what our HR leader wants. And so what I'm pulling through are how do we anchor against those bigger organizational goals. Secondly, this particular format is the same format we use at the corporate and HR at the functional level. So for my team and for sharing purposes, they're seeing the same type of format, even down to some of the language. So under the key priorities, accelerate talent readiness, deepen team effectiveness, evolve organizational performance. That's a lift from our HR strategy slide. We call them our vital few. Below that is our very specific things that we're going to do in L&D, but again, laddered up. I'd say lastly, what we do from here is we build out our specific team goals. So I have a set of goals for overall learning and organizational effectiveness. My direct reports then build that down, build their goals, which all get loaded into our performance management system. And each week at our weekly huddle, we highlight a goal we're working on that week. So we keep those goals alive. We keep the strategy alive. And I think over time, I've learned that the more you can attach the work that you do to that highest level of the organization, the more we go back to the questions that get asked around time, money, impact, the easier those discussions become because you're anchoring in some of those bigger picture goals. Below the detail, probably not dissimilar to what most people are working on the call. We've got a focus on skills, future-ready leadership, some change management, all in support of growth initiatives we're working on.
And when tied to the business goals, especially if you move the needle, that becomes the impact, which is what I love. You know, some of the things we see sometimes in plans and playbooks like this is also for teams who might be a little bit going back to the maturity model on the strategic side and whatnot as well. Really using these plans then to take the next step, which is planning the execution. How are we going to do all this? And getting an understanding of what capacity might look like for the year. And it's a big guessing game. We don't really know. but by guessing, it creates a baseline so that we can start measuring against even our time. And I would encourage everybody, if you are using a managed service provider, that's the right amount of time, the perfect opportunity to get ahead for the year on where you're going to be doing things in-house, where you're going to augment your team a bit, and sharing your plan with your service provider, your partners, really what they are in those cases, so that they can help you increase probability of success as well. Because at the end of the day, it's all about success and celebrating that success when we get to that goal line. So we talked a little bit about different operating models and governance structures, centralized, decentralized, and federated. We saw a big swing last year where about 47% of teams were more federated. And we saw a big shift of people and teams moving more from federated to centralized. I think that was because of the pressures of efficiency and wanting to have more visibility into things like budget or where there could be cost savings. So the benefit in a centralized model, for example, is you might have a budget roll-up of all learning and talent departments. You can see things like if there's overlap in vendor spend, where we can optimize tail spend, things like that. And 21% being on the decentralized side. For those of you who are here with us in the chat, if you know, we'd love to hear from you in the chat also about what model you're using and why that works for you, or if for some reason you're thinking that you need to make a change, what would you like to use from a governance structure and why? And Michelle, when it comes to you know, really partnering with companies, do you see it? Does ELB see a better governance structure for managed service provider to work, or it doesn't really matter, can work in any of these structures?
Managed service providers can really work in any of these structures. It might, trying to think how to phrase this. Yeah, it can definitely work in any. The scale at which we can come in and support can change though, based on these different models that we're working in. You know, when we're able to get into a centralized model and become that managed service provider, and then working directly with, you know, the business goals as a whole, you know, it allows us to trickle down and make, you know, larger strategic plays as far as helping the wider organization. When you have something like a decentralized model, on the other hand, you're starting oftentimes with the goals of that particular business unit or that particular subgroup. So your managed services might be, you know, working up towards, you know, that particular business model's overall objectives. So it really just kind of depends on how many, you know, which one of these models really just determines the number of branches that are going to trickle down. But, you know, thinking strategically, planning strategically, all of those things can really work in any of the models.
Thank you. That's very insightful. And there was a question in the chat about that. We mentioned that we really saw a shift from the beginning of last year up until now, from federated to centralized. So the numbers changed. So what can we share what the numbers were compared to? So it increased about 12% roughly. So centralized was around 35%, a little over a year ago. And this wasn't just a survey that we did. What we did to see this change, which is why I think it's pretty relevant data, is quarterly Cognota does these workshops on reinventing learning operations, and we do some research in them and pull them. There's usually about 100 or so participants that attend these. And so we ask this question, so we get to actually see the results change, and we aggregate the data. So that's how we actually saw this trend. And it's pretty interesting. We wanted to show you a couple examples on how this could also look from a technology perspective. And a lot of the times people think about strategy as just being that strategic plan. The next step to take is, especially if you're centralized, then having one plan for the whole team to follow makes sense. But strategy can live on top of governance as well. You could break down that CHRO plan or that CLO plan into sub teams as well, so that everybody starts laddering into the higher level plans that ultimately tie to the learning goals. And a good way to do this from a workflow perspective is at your intake, at the point of intakes when requests come to you, using corporate goals as a way to help you prioritize which initiatives or investments, if we say yes to, will have the highest impact because they tie to business goals. And if they don't tie to a business goal, you should ask yourself the question, why are we working on this, right? Think of it like Shark Tank, the show. You have the sharks, they only have a certain amount of money, that's their fund, right? In your world, it's your budget. And then you have all these startup entrepreneurs pitching the sharks for money. They can't say yes to everybody, and they're going to have a better outcome by saying yes to the right companies. The right things will give them a better ROI. Your business partners are those startups. They're all pitching you on to do the next best thing. You only have a limited budget that you can use. You want to be good investors and say yes to the right things that are going to give you the ROI and the highest level of impact. So next time you're watching the show, just remember that you're sitting in the shark seat as well, and you have more power than you think, right? It's not intake, it's request. People are coming to you asking you for something. It's a request. It doesn't necessarily need to be a yes. There's power in saying no as well. The power of saying no. So from a workflow perspective, doing it at the intake level not only helps you to prioritize, but you can start to show data on the things that you said no to and why, so that if you ever get pushback, you can start to show that these things didn't lead up to any business goals. They would have been bad investments. When you say stuff like that to the business, it adds instant credibility to the way that you think. And also at the project level, when you say yes to something and you start executing it, how do you tie or link projects to the business goal? So you can see here in the example that we have the company goal and it's broken down, but then you can start linking to projects as well. And then also ROI and impact. This is not something that you think about after you start to execute. This is something that you think about before you start to execute. If you start thinking about measurement, effectiveness, ROI after the project's been built or delivered, you've already lost the battle. It becomes extremely hard to do. But after you say yes, after you start, during the process of actually starting to consult with your business partners, that's when you should have your ROI frameworks that you can work through to start making that yes more meaningful. Well, we said yes because it aligned to our business goals. We said yes because it was the right thing to do for the business. It's going to create value. How are we going to create that value? Let's now go and break that down by setting the objectives for the levels that we want to measure in partnership with the business, so that we really understand what success needs to look like for the business and what evidence we can in partnership get from them to either say we got to that criteria or we didn't. So framing ROI is not by mistake. Framing effectiveness and measurement is not by mistake. If you set all of this up as your roadmap in advance, and then you start executing time and money on it, you're just going to increase probability of success to actually getting to the outcomes that you want to get to as well. And Gary, naturally, I'm going to ask you a question about, where do you think your team is when it comes to this, or what improvements are you hoping to make over the next 12 months? Because no executive that we talk to is perfect when it comes to this yet.
Yeah, certainly I always think that ROI sometimes is the holy grail that we're searching for in learning and development. But having said that, we are early days of implementing the LearnOps tool, and I think this is one of the things that I'm most excited about, being able to take a project from intake, start to build out your goals around measurement and ROI, and then be able to see the progress through the development of the program through your measurement, and then be able to tell that story backwards. I think this capability is one of those things that I think will be a game changer for us to be able to tell our story differently, and have the data accessible to be able to put it together in a way that makes sense, rather than trying to grab from here or insert some qualitative data to make it feel good. Like, I'm super excited about this particular capability. I'm looking.
Yeah, we're excited to partner with you as well on it. And the best part about taking an approach like this is sometimes you don't need ROI. And how do you answer that question instead of guessing? Well, when you take a ROI framework approach up front before you execute, before you spend time and money, and you're working with your business partner to define success, you say like, you know, who needs to know about success? Maybe they say nobody needs to, because we just want to get to behavior change, and I'm the only person that cares about that. Well, then you probably don't need to measure ROI in those cases. If it's a big corporate goal, and you're working with the partner, your stakeholders, and all the people involved in that, it's a bigger program. You know, one customer of ours, believe it or not, is investing $80 million into a global program. Massive company, Fortune 15. It's a global program going to touch everybody, and it's $80 million investment. Absolutely, the CFO in that case wants to understand what ROI is starting to shape and look like when you're spending $80 million, and they don't want to wait to hear it at the end. They want to see, are we getting ROI on along the way as a health indicator, as a score, so that we can make decisions in real time to save money or make money as we are learning. And so the best way to ask is, if do we actually need to do ROI, is work with the business partners up front when it's cheap, before you started executing, to see what data we need. What's our strategy around data? What metrics do we want to measure and why? And guess what? When you work with the business like that, they become passionate about the program and the problems that you're going to be solving together as well. So I'm really excited to dive into this topic on managed service providers as well, because it's not something that often people talk about with, you know, that you hear a lot of people talking about or whatnot. And it should be talked about, because in an economy where resources are tight and you can't do everything all the time, you know, you need to really figure out how to be entrepreneurial. Right. And what I mean by that is, if you're faced with limited resources, but you have expectations to create a lot of value, you need to think outside the box and save the limited resources to focus on the biggest strategic projects or programs for the organization, and leverage external partners like ELB, obviously, to maximize resource potential so that you can do more with less, which creates value, especially if it ties back to business goals and impact. And so it's really about overcoming this need of, which Fortune magazine is saying, talent and L&D are being forced to do more with less, right? This is something that you hear about everywhere. It's on our home hero page of the Cognota website, because it's all about, how do we do more with less? How do we solve this capacity paradox, these challenges of overcoming the needs that the business has on us with doing more than less? And you know, our advice on this is, before jumping into I need more headcount, which is often what you hear, we're at capacity, I need more headcount. Whenever we hear that, we always ask the person, have you done a deep dive into your processes? Is there process inefficiency that's happening? And most of the time, the answer is yes, because of disconnected tools or whatever. But the easiest way to unblock your team and add capacity first is by process improvement, operational excellence, right? Now, if you've made the process improvements and you've done that and you're still at overcapacity, and you haven't done the automation, or if you've done the automation and whatnot, then you really want to be smart about where you have the bottlenecks and why. So just from a technology perspective, again, this is an example of views that you can set up to see where you might start to have capacity challenges, and the ability to drill down into what those might be all the way to the task level to see, is it because somebody's working on something that's not high priority? Maybe it's lower priority, where you can start moving time and money around, being agile. But once you've done these things from an operational improvement perspective, and there's still the capacity challenges, you have to address them. Either you get more headcount, you get more budget, or again, you get creative and leverage augmented staffing to be more agile and to do things quickly, so that you can focus on the project execution, the value creation, versus more onboarding and things that might conflict with the speed that you need to deliver at that particular moment. So first, get that irrefutable proof that you can't make more space, and then think out the box. And in my opinion, augmented staffing is a great way to do that. And Gary, I know that you've cultivated a culture of continuous learning and growth mindset as well at Land O'Lakes. And so how do you think about all these things? And love to understand how you think about problems and solutions.
Yeah, and I think I'll start by just kind of picking up where you left off on the managed service providers. It's just so appreciative of having partners today to help us think differently. So on the slide on the left-hand side is part of the drill down on my strategy, is part of our playbook, and that was an idea that I actually got from a webinar that Ryan, that you and ELB did a little over a year ago, and it was kind of like the penny dropped, like that's exactly what I need to bring my strategy to life. And so while there wasn't any money exchanged in that for you, it certainly added tremendous value for me. And I think where I'm seeing some of the managed service providers that I want to work with, that I want to invest in, that are going to help me, are the ones that are really understanding my problems, that are showing up and saying, we have a solution that's going to match your needs, not tell me what all your problems are and we'll find something for you. You're showing up and saying, we get it, we understand. I think the connecting through the community is super important. So things like LearnOps Academy or some of the other network groups that I've got managed service providers creating also just help me to find kindred spirits doing the work that we can share with. I think of things like skills. There's some of the work we're doing right now is just feels so huge when you look at the external environment, like skills or AI. And so an MSP that can help say, here's a way that you can enter into that space, make sense of it all, rather than you need to show up and do all of this. It's like, here's the step-toe ways that you can do that, and then help me meet learners where they are. Or I have some current vendors that I've been working with for years that are still doing very long traditional ways of delivering content, and that's not how my learners at Land O'Lakes want learning. Like they want it shorter, they want it quicker, they want it in bite size. So how do we show up differently? So certainly I'd say where I look to spend money with MSPs is really the ones that are going to partner with me, to collaborate, bringing me value that I might not be able to find on my own.
I love that.
Piggyback on what Gary was saying, that really connects back to what you were talking about at the beginning about the order taker type of partnership or vendor really relation at that point. Because when you're looking for a managed service provider, what you want to look for is exactly what Gary's describing, someone that's going to come in and get to know your organization from the inside out, understand every different learner group that is going to be in there, and then really take a deep dive into those strategic goals, those business goals, and then begin to solve those issues with creative, innovative solutions. What you don't want is someone that's going to come in and say, tell me what kind of trainings you need, or tell me how many e-learnings it is, or instructor-led trainings. You don't want someone that's going to go down that path. You want someone that's going to really be that hand-in-hand partner and feel like an extension of your organization rather than a vendor to it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue also to how do you build the business case for resourcing as well. If you have that need, how do you go about even talking about it and doing that, Michelle?
Yeah. So yeah, when engaging a managed service provider, or if you're going to kind of start smaller scale, there's 3 basic ways that you can do that. Different names for these, but essentially you can start. I'm going to go kind of on the right to left here. You can go with the staff augmentation route, like you were talking about, Ryan. Ryan, you were talking about earlier with, you've got a capacity issue. The easy way forward is to bring a resource in that can supplement your team. Sometimes that is the right solution. If you have taken a review of how everybody's working, your actual goals for your organization, and you really just need another person on hand, staff augmentation is a great way to do that. But again, as you mentioned earlier, if you haven't already done an audit of, your current processes, your current workflows, and all of those things, you might want to do that first, which is another thing that actually managed service provider can help you do. Come in and be that consultative partner to help you take a review of your current environment and, the best ways to gain efficiencies in that way. Sometimes if you're going to need somebody, I'm going to go to the middle. If you need someone to come in and get some support to you, but it's very much less defined, right? You need help with certain areas, but you're not exactly sure where it starts and stops, the scale. That retainer model, sometimes called time and materials, where it's just this hourly, contractual agreement that you have to, get the support as needed on demand. And then there's the complete project outsourcing, right? So you have very defined metrics, very defined asks. Project outsourcing is a really great way to do that. And we'll look at some pros and cons of those in some of the coming slides here.
I guess in the comment box for everybody who's participating, how are you currently resourcing projects when capacity feels stretched? What are you doing? I'd love to see the insights from everybody, what they're doing to get creative when resources are feeling stretched and they need to keep the work going as well. So would love to hear from you in the chat. And I think, Michelle, you talked about some of the ways to do it, how you can do this as well. What are some of the use cases when it comes to either outsourcing retainer work or staff augmentation?
That might actually go better with the pros and cons slide when we get to that one, but we can kind of dive into those in a little bit more detail. If it's if it's a very defined project, as very defined starting and stopping points, very defined for deliverables, that's where your outsourcing, right, is going to be your best bet. If you are really looking for someone to take over and, build you, for example, as a leadership development program, but we're not quite sure exactly what that looks like, we haven't quite determined how many hours it should be, who the learners are going to be, how many branches and paths you need to take in order for it to be, effective, that retainer model would probably be a good model for you to have. Staff aug, if you have a number of projects that are ongoing, things that you just need some supplemental help with, staff aug is a great way to do that. And it's good when you have information that, you want to keep behind your own firewalls, because this is going to be someone that is essentially part of your organization for a short period of time or a defined period of time. But you're not necessarily looking to hire a new person, but it does bring somebody into your organization that you can, tap on and really gets to know who you are from the inside.
And you talked about the pros and cons
Yeah.
of each, right?
Yep. So when you're talking about project outsourcing, there are benefits and use cases, as you said, for each one of these models. One not being better than another, they just come in different forms and really have different, kind of purposes within your organization. So the pros, especially when you're reaching out because your team is at capacity, the biggest pro of something like this is most of the lift on putting together the strategy, putting together your training, putting together your curriculum maps, all of those things are taken off of your plate. Of course, it would still be a collaborative partnership. You would still have conversations and reviews, but the bulk of the work in project outsourcing is removed from your internal team and frees them up to be able to work on other things, other initiatives. As I mentioned, this is, best used when you know exactly what it is that you are going to start and finish with, exactly where the state of the union is at that point and where you want it to go. Approximately how long the engagement's going to be and exactly what those deliverables are. And the other pro for that is you're going to get that consistency. You have an assigned team that is going to follow a same process. It's going to all be defined, agreed upon, signed on the dotted line. And so you just have very, very clear expectations of the role that everybody's going to play and what those outcomes are going to be. Everything that I said over here could also be a con. I'm sorry, can you go back real quick?
Yeah.
I'll go real quick through this one. Everything that we said on the pro can be a con depending on where you're at. There's less flexibility. If you make a change in what it is you're looking for, that could, be outside of the contract.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. Be outside of the contract and create the need for a change of scope. You've got to go back through that whole process. So when you are, doing the complete outsourcing, you really want to make sure you have a full understanding of what it is that you're looking for. And then the retainer, it's a little bit less defined. You don't necessarily have to know exactly what the final deliverables are going to be, but it does still remove the bulk of the work from the organization's plate, right? It is still going to be lifted off of the plate and you free up your resources to work on different projects, but it allows for more iterative approach, more collaboration, easier to scale up and down. Con, of course, is many times you're working within a fixed budget. And so when you're working within a fixed budget and your deliverables and scope is not clearly defined, it can become very easy to, not be meeting and get to the end goal exactly of where you want to be within the budget that you think you have, just because it is more of that iterative process, and can just require a lot more that says trust. It requires a lot of communication to make sure people are spending their hours effectively. And you're going to hopefully get to where you need to go. So it is one of those models where it can work really well, but you've got to be constantly checking in to make sure everything is going in the way that you want it to, so you can get to that end goal, whatever that looks like. And then the final one, that staff augmentation. Pros, again, if really it's simply a capacity issue, not necessary, Gary, like you were saying, a subject matter expertise issue, or even, skill issue or anything along those lines, bringing in a staff augmentation type person can immediately upskill increase your capacity. And because they're going to be working directly with your organization, they will adapt to your processes. They will adapt to your ways of working, as compared to the others. Your MSP will have its own processes and things that it usually works within. So this is great for when you really want the resource to become part of your team, to work exactly alongside you, alongside the rest of your designers or developers or whoever it is that's working alongside those projects. And it's usually pretty fast, especially compared to trying and going out and hiring somebody. Cons, the other two we were talking about, reducing the load, that's on your plates, taking a lot of that load over and putting it on the MSP. This one, day to day, you're still going to be in charge of the oversight. You're still going to be in charge of ensuring that resource or resources are doing exactly what you need them to do to get to the end. So it is more like having a, employee on your team rather than the project moving to the side. And so if you're already stretched, especially as it says your leads, your managers, and they're just going to have one more person to oversee, it might not be the best fit, but it's a really nice way to bolster your team in a quick fashion. And this goes back and go ahead.
No, I was going to say, but when it back down to the strategy on what to do, right, Michelle?
Right, exactly. Yeah. So bringing that all together, and you've said it a couple times, what's really important is that your MSP not just come in, propose a exact solution, one of those three methods that we were talking about, but make sure that what we are doing here is aligned to your goals, making sure that before jumping into a development task, we understand what is that reason behind the ask. What are the pain points that the business is trying to address? And it's got to align to those overall business goals and objectives, not only for leadership buy-in so that they are going to get behind and fund your requests, but just to make sure you are actually moving your organization forward and you're not just doing that training for the sake of training. Also got to make sure strategically when you're looking at it that everything you're doing is aligning to the audience and the behaviors that need to shift. It's not enough just to know who they are, but you need to understand what they're doing now, where you want them to go, and then have those clear behavioral outcomes that you work into the development and not be thinking of them after the fact. It really should be part of that process. And then we're talking training, we're all L&D people here, but it's important to remember training is not always the answer. It'd be very easy, to slap a course on, we're having this problem, let's just do a course. But if you don't really do that root cause analysis, figure out why the problem is occurring, then you have to make sure that you find the right answer. By just jumping directly to building training, you may not be solving the problem and you're going to be right back where you were before. Going quickly here, I know we're kind of running out of time, but it's also important to prioritize your efforts, especially when your capacity is limited. You got to make sure you are really being targeted in what it is that you're going to try to build and where you're going to use your resources, be they internal or bringing in a team to support you. And then making sure you have a roadmap. You don't want to just do these one and done trainings because they're just not going to work long term. You want to make sure that you have a clear path forward of where you are and where you want to go, and then how you're going to get there.
And when I see put it all together, and then earlier we looked at Gary's slide for his priorities and the business goals and the roadmap, it doesn't need to be so complex. When you lay it out like that, it just tells it actually tells the whole story before the story is formed, right? It's the future state, right? That's what you did, Gary, is you showed the future state of what the organization could look like with the investments you wanted to make. And then the data is just the storytelling is just like this is what we set out to do, and this is what happened. And these are the data is just to talk about the learnings along the way. So you want to make sure you collect the data along the way as well. We do have a question in here with the last few minutes. Will says, how is AI impacting your trainings team with creation, delivery, and impact? Gary, are you using AI, and is it impacting your team at all with creation, delivery, or impact?
We are definitely using AI, and we're also partnering with our technology team on educating on AI. So we're trying to role model what we're setting forth for the rest of the organization. I'd say early days to say how big the impact is. We've developed a couple early programs and decreased design time pretty significantly in those early wins. Where we're seeing the efficiencies are really on the research and understanding of the problem and doing some iteration on learning design. We'll be adopting some design tools, which in the near future, we're signing contracts now, I think, which we'll start to see some of those bigger gains. So early days to say how huge it is, but we are certainly seeing efficiencies using and leveraging AI.
And with so much competition on which design tools to use, how did you make your assessment?
We listened to some vendors in the space, and there was a pretty consistent voice around one particular one. And then my team's been testing using some of the demo accounts and putting them to use. And we kind of all mutually said this is the one we want to go with. Unbeknownst to the other part of the organization was doing the same thing. So we're looking at the potential enterprise license across the organization on that tool.
Oh, cool.
And then I'll hop in really quick. ELB has been really strong in the AI space, bringing in experts in the industry, and it really has impacted every part of our industry and processes in some way, shape, or form. We still have clients that aren't comfortable in the AI space. So we always start with, making sure that whatever it is that we're going to do, is agreed to by our customers and clients. But we have tools that have integrated AI that have really changed the game. It really can streamline content creation, research, as Gary was saying. And it also can have a huge impact on the learner experience as far as being able to make more adaptive courses, more personalized learning, give more personalized feedback. And then it also will allow you to have a lot deeper metrics than you would have been able to have before. So it's really all encompassing and can touch almost every part of the process.
Yeah. Well, I'll be at ATD. I think, Michelle, you said you'll be there as well. So if anybody would like to meet in person, and if you're at ATD, let us know. We'd love to connect with you and shake hands and invite you to some cool stuff if you're not already registered. So do reach out, and just thank you, everybody, for your time today. I know everybody's very busy, and it's been a pleasure to share what we're seeing in the industry with you today and spending time together. And thank you again to Gary and Michelle for co-hosting this, and for ELB leading this very important topic, and Casey for doing such an amazing job at putting this all together, and with Rebecca Pickles behind the scenes from the Cognota team as well.
Yes. Thank you guys so much. Thank you for all the expertise on this panel and in the chat with our attendees. We've got a lot of resources being shared and information. So we really appreciate you guys' time and your wisdom. We're going to send a recording of this webinar. You'll receive it via email next week. Okay, so we're so glad that you were able to join us. Thank you so much, everybody.
Good job, team.